film is an expose of how the Americans, in particular the military, have taken the waste product of the nuclear industry, the nuclear power industry, and put it into everything from bombs to bullets to landmines to cruise missiles, and fired it around the planet at their enemies, initially in the first Gulf War in Iraq, and in Afghanistan, and in the Balkans, and again in the second Gulf War.
We now know that very large quantities of DU were dropped in the Middle East as part of the first Gulf War. In fact, Iraqis came to Australia, parliamentarians' delegation came to Australia and pleaded with us to recognise that there were many sick children, that their health facilities were appalling, and that there were many babies dying from genetic problems and problems associated, they think, with depleted uranium.
The thing that makes depleted uranium so effective is the fact that it not only maintains its shape, but it actually becomes sharper as it penetrates armor.
And it's obviously disastrous for the planet because this stuff is very radioactive inside the body. It can be breathed in, it can be ingested through water or eating something that it's ended up in the food chain. And so it's a real disaster for the planet because you've got millions of little time bombs just going off as a result of this stuff being circulated, billions of particles. And that's basically what the film is about.
It's interesting that the United States, in fact Australia, it was so proud of the fact that this was over in a short time frame, but of course what we know is that these weapons were exploded in a very short time frame, but that doesn't mean that they didn't deliver a payload of huge contamination.
The primary impact that it had in the Gulf was it's one of the reasons that the war was so short. It's one of the things that helped us win that war so quickly.
I don't think there's any doubt that there are long-term birth defects from radioactive material. I mean, no one would disagree with that. There's plenty of evidence worldwide. The Australian government and others have argued that there's no evidence, though, with depleted uranium because it has to be ingested, because it has to be in a wound. Then there are no health effects. We heard the government say that, but it's pretty clear that unless you properly test, unless you follow up people over a long period of time, you're not going to know that. And so you have to, I think, look at what's happened in Iraq, look at what's happened following the Gulf War, and then you can make an assessment about the long-term effects of depleted uranium.
We were expecting just a normal baby, and when the baby was born, as soon as it was born, it was very evident that he had problems.
This waste is very dangerous for a long period of time, and so the idea that you could get rid of huge quantities by bombing other countries, I think has been. I can see why it's been so widely accepted in the United States by the nuclear industry, but of course the question is how humane is that, and we know that it isn't.
This is the prime delivery platform for depleted uranium ordnance, the U.S. Army's A-10 tank buster.
So it comes as something of a surprise that the military men thought, let's not store this stuff at all. Let's fire it at our enemies. And fortunately for the arms manufacturers, the US government was ready to give it away for free. Glad to have solved the waste problem. Depleted uranium is one of the heaviest metals on Earth, but it's easily moulded into shells dense enough to penetrate the thickest armour plating.
There are treaties which make it very clear that toxic waste must be handled and stored by the country that generates it. So we would be going against international treaties if we would agree to that. I have no doubt that America has acted in effect against those treaties as well by dumping their depleted uranium in the Middle East.
Our politicians are now telling us that nuclear power is the way to go. But everyone knows that the downside of nuclear power is dangerous waste. Depleted uranium is that waste, and it has a radioactive half-life of 4.5 billion years. Intense debate continues about how to safely store this nasty stuff. 30 kilometres away from the locked military gates at Shoalwater Bay is the sleepy little coastal town called Yeppoon. Population 10,000. The good citizens of Yeppoon have little or no idea what the politicians and military planners in faraway Canberra have in store for their backyard. Here, the biggest concern most days is whether the interest rates will continue to rise, whether the waves out back are pumping, or the fish are biting. And it blows a lot in Yeppoon.
The second half of the film looks at how the United States has worked a deal with the Howard government to enable them to test their latest missiles and smart bombs in our most pristine environments, in particular Shoalwater Bay near Rockhampton, Lancelin off the coast in Western Australia, 140 clicks north of Perth, and in Northern Territory at 2 bases there.